If you can build an organization that's based on transparency, accountability, and authenticity, I think you create a culture in which people feel like they can grow and handle whatever comes next.
Welcome to Stickology. Today's guest is Mike Marinello, a corporate communications leader who has advised CEOs, global executives, and public figures shaping the reputation of the world's most influential organizations. As managing director and global head of communications for JP Morgan Payments, Mike inspires trust and strengthens connections. His career has spanned critical roles at Aon, Bloomberg, Microsoft, and the U.S. Senate, and has been defined by his ability to build high-impact teams and drive lasting loyalty that any brand would strive for. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's great to be here.
Well, let's dig in. Mike, you've built several high-performing teams across some of the world's largest organizations. None of that is possible without trust. What is the key to building a resilient culture of trust in large global organizations?
As a leader, I try to be painfully transparent in my communication and in my actions with my team. I'm going to treat you as equally as I can as your boss. And as a result, I'm going to expect that you will both respect that and then will be accountable for both your actions and your outputs and your impact. When you treat people like you would like to be treated yourself, in any situation, you're going to gain trust and you're going to gain momentum and you're going to have great outcomes. And, I think, too many times people say, well, I'm going to treat them like an adult. Well, not everyone treats adults well, but if you treat people the way you want to be treated, I think that's even better. That sort of goes a click below, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. I tell my kids all the time, treat people as you want to be treated. And it's a philosophy that can be applied in both our personal and business lives, right?
I do the same thing as a father, which is I'm as transparent as I can be as a father, right? And as they grow, you get the ability to be more transparent, but then you also hold, them accountable. And I think they appreciate that. And I think it's very applicable to both parenting and how you manage a team. I mean, it's a little different, but in some ways, but I think the philosophy, transcends both.
Yeah, maybe your vernacular is different, but the philosophy is definitely the same. Okay, let's get a little more granular. Beyond trust, a thriving culture requires that people feel a sense of belonging. What are some of the things that you do with your teams to cultivate a sense of connectivity and shared purpose?
One of the things that I try to do as best as possible is bring them together as often I can, whether it's virtually or in person, and whether that's in big groups or in small groups, because the connectivity between individuals is just something that we took for granted for COVID and is so much more valuable and so much more relevant when you consider high performing organizations, that I think it's an invaluable thing. And then I think the other thing that I try to do on a regular basis, either, with my leadership team or with, the folks across my team, or even have my leaders do with their team, is I really stress the value of recognition. And recognition doesn't have to be bonuses or Starbucks cards, although those are nice. But I think, recognition is just when someone does a good job or makes a good suggestion or even contributes, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it to them directly, acknowledge it in front of the crowd. There's a funny thing. My kids grew up loving the movie The Incredibles. And there's a line in The Incredibles from one of the kids who says to the father, well, if everyone's great, nobody's great, right? And I think that's a challenge. That's different than recognition, right? When everybody gets a trophy just because you don't want someone to feel bad, that creates actually a negative culture. I think when you recognize people for work well done that they've deserved, I think it's fine to not only acknowledge it to them, but to the group, because you want others to see what good looks like and inspire them to do the same. So those are the two things I try to do on a common level. And if you haven't guessed, I've also coached sports teams, so a lot of this transfers to that as well.
Yeah. I think it's important to everybody to feel seen and appreciated. So acknowledging contributions when they're earned is really important. And it ties directly back to your point earlier about transparency and setting the right standards early and often. After all, you want people to see what good looks like versus making everyone feel like they're part of a trophy for everybody culture, you know?
And specifically for their contributions, like not everyone is going to contribute in the same way, but if they're contributing in exactly the way they should be at the highest level they can be, then they should be recognized, right? And that's whether it's your EA or whether it's your highest performer in media relations. You know, they all contribute to the team and they should all be recognized for a job well done, right? You can't outbalance great performance, one over the other. That's something that I say, that sort of is an interesting thing to think about when you're building a team and building trust, is that no one function or one output is more important than the other, right? And by the way, if we succeed, we succeed together.
You want people to feel that sense of belonging and like they're part of something, especially when you're faced with tough decisions. You want people to feel like they're part of a team. Mike, speaking of which, you've led teams through several high-stakes situations. Can you share a story when your team's culture and trust impacted its ability to keep or win a client?
The one that shaped me professionally dates back to my days in the agency, where we were trying to unseat Ketchum, who had been with Medtronic for about 15 years and seemed like the unconquerable incumbent. And we made it through the RFP rounds and we made it all the way to the finals. And it was the night before. We're in a hotel in Minneapolis. Anna Marie DeSalva, myself, and another teammate were, in this ballroom, the three of us in this ballroom, putting, running through our deck and, remembering the slides. And we just stopped. And we thought, if we go in there just like Ketchum, why are they going to change their mind? What would they do different? Why would they hire us? And so we all decided, the hell with it, and we dumped the deck. And we went in with flipboards and markers and walked them through what we were going to do. And we had a deck, we gave it to them, but that's what we presented, our own thinking, our own team, and the way we were going to, differentiate ourselves and be the best choice for them. Because we thought, what the hell, like let's go down swinging as opposed to like knowing, right, what was going to happen if we just presented the deck. So we did it. And, we all sort of like felt great about it, hugged each other, and then, got in the cars and went to the airport. By the time we got to the airport, they called us and told us you won. And I just remember, thinking, wow, right? Like show up differently, right? The culture and the trust we had in each other and the ability to say, let's go for it. Let's do something different. Really shaped, for me, how I approached both, later on pitching business, but then also just as a leader in an organization or just in everything else I did. That whole concept of showing up differently and have the courage, having the courage to lose on merit, takes a lot of courage. And not a lot of organizations support that. And I think that was a testament to the agency we work for, but I think it was a testament to the culture we had and the people who worked together.
That's a great story. And a few things come to mind when I hear it. Number one, taking this risk definitely showed courage and internal trust. And number two, that combined with your employees' willingness to give you permission to be innovative and think outside the box clearly allowed you to show up different and win the account.
If we had lost and went back and told our bosses what we had done and why, they would have been supportive. They would have said, well, you gave it your best shot versus why the heck did you do that, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, back to your first question, I said transparency and accountability, and you hit a word that's critical, which is authenticity, right? And that's the other thing I tried with my teams is making sure that I'm authentic so that they can be their authentic selves. And I know that sort of sounds hyperbole, but that really gives permission to people to do that.
Yeah, I really believe that authenticity is one of the most important qualities of a leader because you want your team to believe in you every step of the way. Kind of speaking of which, let's shift gears a little bit. I'd like to discuss choosing the we, a team, over the me, an individual performer. Could you share any stories in which you've had to make tough calls to protect the entire team, possibly when dealing with tough individuals, and what that's taught you about leadership?
I do not tolerate those who do not carry our culture. And you can have a high performer that's a jerk. And I just cannot stomach that. It becomes corrosive and it becomes intolerable. And you not only erode the culture on your team, but you erode your team's trust in you as a leader to not handle the problem. And it speaks volumes for you as a leader if you let that stuff go, as much as it does corrode the environment. Even if you're working hard to correct the behavior, but it's not working, right? So I might be in there like trying to coach the person, help the person, get them to see why they need to adapt, change, or grow. But if you don't pull yourself back and say, how much of this do I do before it really impacts the team and their lack of understanding or lack of appreciation or trust in me to handle the problem. So for me, that's one of the things that I've had to do a number of times, and it's never an easy thing to do because not all the people who don't map culturally are bad people or are jerks, right? It's not always about a jerk. Sometimes it's just folks who just can't get it, won't do it, stuck in their ways. And so it's not always that, but it's the cultural thing that becomes then a cultural detriment is to me the thing that I have the least amount of tolerance for. And I think that does come from both having been an athlete, in college at the Division I level and seeing what it truly takes to win and to be a team. And then as a coach, right, where I've won championships with my teams, even though they're like 7th and 8th grade basketball, nothing momentous. But to win a championship, you got to do certain things. And, and how you treat, I had to bench my own son because of his attitude. That was a bellwether moment, right, in 7th and 8th grade basketball, when my son, who felt like, well, my dad's the coach, I can do whatever I want, act out, blah, blah, blah. He's not going to yell at me in front of the other guys. I took him out of practice a couple of times and I benched him. And then I finally sat him down and said, you're part of this team just like everybody else. And you think I would have taken that from anybody else? And doing that showed those kids that I was for real, that I wasn't going to tolerate my son who wasn't behaving the way he should have been. And that's how I would treat a team.
That story does a great job of illustrating the conviction required to protect a culture. It also shows how incredibly difficult it is to be a parent. It's a fine line. You want to give everyone coaching, including your kids, but there must be a point where you prioritize the team's health over one person's performance or potential. That's what ultimately preserves the team's trust in you as a leader. Let's shift to the topic of customer connection. Can you give me an example of a brand who has mastered the art of making its customers feel truly connected?
A recent example for me goes back to my days when I was at Aon, and I was in this group of CCOs. I was introduced at the time to the woman who was running communications for Levi's, and it was the whole thing. It was the whole situation around Roe v. Wade, and they were just so authentic and so immediate in their response because who their customer base was. And I so admired that work. And we were struggling with it at Aon because we had such a diverse, not only employee base geographically, but demographically, and and then we were all over the world and whatever. And we were just, we had all these different types of clients, and so we were really struggling with it. And I spent a number of hours on the phone with her, and she helped me. And one of the things she said to me was, give yourself a break, Mike. Like our demographic is a lot easier to read, right? So yes, we did it right, and yes, we were swift, but we also have a very defined, audience, and it was a no-brainer. It's different for what you're dealing with, and there's going to be hundreds of levels of nuance, and so give yourself that break. And so by being able to have her counsel allowed me and my team to figure it out with our executives as to how to go forward at Aon. And it was a super helpful moment because, again, I learned from her and took an organization that, didn't have an easy answer, but was able to work itself through. So I think, again, all companies have to be thinking that way right now. And the successful ones are the ones who are doing that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I also think it speaks to the importance of leveraging your network to think better and think stronger. Mike, you've spoken about showing up differently, which requires creativity and innovation. What's an example of time where direct engagement with a customer or employee led to an unexpected insight and changed your business's strategy or self-perception?
I think two examples stick out in my mind. I think when I was at Bloomberg working for Mike and both for the company, the pivot of them historically thinking of themselves as either media or finance adjacent to no, we're actually a tech company, right? When you think about the Bloomberg terminal, that's their revenue generation. What is it? It's a software as a service that sits on the second largest private cloud in the world. That's a tech company. And and so when they were able to sort of realize as the shifting dynamics and the shifting marketplace that they had to pivot because of what they were hearing from their clients, what they were hearing from the people they were recruiting and their own people, that pivot was necessary and required. And I was happy to be a part of that, pivot and shift. But the company really recognized it, embraced it, understood it. And that was because of the feedback from their clients. I think it was from the feedback from their own people. I think it was from a recognition of the environment. And by the way, I was just talking to him yesterday. There's no shock that Mike has named his successor to be Vlad Klitschko, who at the time was head of engineering product, right, and technology. And he named his predecessor, to be Vlad, who that's where it was. Where I guarantee you 5 years ago, or 5 years, if that hadn't happened, they would have named the head of sales without a doubt, right? And not that that person isn't worthy, but when you realize, like, wait, we're a product-driven technology company, a product-driven technology person should be running this company. And by the way, that's what Mike was. I heard this quote from Bill Gates that said if Mike Bloomberg had done what he had done in a garage in Palo Alto instead of an office building in New York, he'd be right next to me and Steve as a tech innovator, right? And so it's funny how you sort of find yourself, lose yourself, find yourself, and come back to your roots. But I think that's one of my favorite examples.
I think of Bloomberg today, the company, as a tech company, probably as a result of a lot of that work that was done then. But I've never really thought about Mike Bloomberg as a tech guy. So I learned something new today.
Not to go into a Bloomberg origin story, but Mike ran IT at Solomon Brothers for 3 years, and sort of became a technologist, even though he did actually study engineering. And so he took that forward. So even building the first terminals that they sold to Morgan Stanley, right? And having people bringing in a team that created the software and the hardware, but his vision and so it's really interesting. That's why I remember saying to them, we are a tech company. We just have to make sure everybody knows it. Right.
Going back to that pivot story, it shows that you need to listen 24/7, because when you do, you're going to hear what the marketplace, the customers, your employees have to say, right?
And data. I mean, data also showed that, the real pivotal point there was data that helped the conversation, which was they were having a hard time recruiting people because people didn't think Bloomberg was a tech company. And so they were losing to Google and Apple and all the folks, Microsoft, folks they needed to recruit. So the data, so they sort of intuitively saw it and then knew it and then realized, oh my gosh, if people don't know this, we're not going to be able to hire people who can build this product. So it became this virtuous cycle.
Mike, on the topic of recruiting and hiring a high impact team, what is your advice for a new leader who is building an organization from scratch?
If you're going to build something, you bring in people you know and trust to start, create the bedrock, and have everyone. Harvard did the study about that. That's the number one, way to success for new teams is you bring in people you know and trust, and you row together, and it makes the rowing a lot easier. And then you bring in people who then follow and row along, so to speak. And so my thing has been to bring in people you either know and trust, or people who you believe will be sort of culture carriers like that. Here's that phrase again. When you bring them in as you build. So I will use two examples, complete opposite models. When I was building the team at Aon, I had a bunch of piece parts that I was bringing together and creating this new organization, but I knew we were short on senior level talent. And so I had to bring in senior level talent that could not only lead, but be those culture carriers, because you're bringing people who've been doing it for 7 or 8 years differently along. And you're also bringing in people who didn't know what it was like prior. They were just here to operate off of the vision I had for the team. So I brought in all new folks that I hadn't previously worked with, but folks who, when I went through the interview process, or folks who had been recommended to me, right? Things of that nature were all, folks who I felt like, yes, I can trust these folks. They get the vision. They're excited about building, and they were going to be culture carriers. At JP Morgan, I did the opposite because I was really starting from scratch. But what I needed I needed to scale myself. I was one person. And so I needed to scale myself fast. And so I brought in senior people I knew and trusted, and who could help me scale myself first, who then I could build under. And then I have a leadership team now who is all of that ilk, who are now bringing in, hiring, and running teams. Similar approach, different models based on what the environment was that I was walking into, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And good or bad, I now have the image of 25 Mike Marinellos running around. Mike, I want to close out on a topic of inspiration and longevity. Right now, things are changing at such a rapid pace. What's one thing that a leader can do to build a team that will stand the test of time?
If you can build an organization that's based on transparency, accountability, and authenticity, I think you create a culture in which people feel like they can grow and handle whatever comes next, and they'll do it together. So I think the culture of the team that you build is a bellwether for your success, right? No matter what comes your way. So for example, AI is disrupting everything right now, one way or another. And AI is not going to take your job, but the person using it will.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's what I tell my team. I was like, don't be afraid of it. It's going to make you more, it's not going to replace you. It's going to make you more valuable. It's going to make you more impactful. It's going to make you more effective. And I think, and they trust me when I tell them that. They believe it because they see me doing it. And then it doesn't become, it doesn't become the boogeyman. It actually becomes something that they should explore. And then what we're doing now is we're doing all sorts of things. We're doing all sorts of community learnings and sharing best practices. And I learned this prompt, and we have a prompt library, little things like that where people can help each other through it and learn it. And I think that's how you do it. But that comes from culture. That doesn't come from process right? That comes from culture.
Yeah. And it comes from a growth mindset of being willing to try stuff, learn, innovate, and fail. And sometimes they say that the best successes come from those big failures over time.
The fail fast model. But two of my favorite quotes that I share with my team all the time was, one's from John Wooden, the famous collegiate basketball coach, who said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Yep.
And then the Edison quote, which is amazing, he said, I didn't fail 999 times. I learned 999 times how not to make a light bulb. And that's the mindset of success, right? It's not, someone is like, oh, you're spinning a narrative. But no, if you truly believe that and okay, I failed this time. What did I do differently? What can I do differently? And you don't stop, right? There's a difference between kidding yourself and inspiring yourself. And it's a fine line, but it's true.
I love those quotes, especially the second one. They underline the fail fast, learn faster growth mindset that is key to longevity. Mike, we've known each other for 25 years, and every conversation with you is inspirational. I always learn more about leadership, and I walk away with a smile. So thanks for sharing your insights today, and thanks for once again making me smile.
No, thanks, Steve. That means a lot. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here and you taking the time to want to listen to me talk.
That was a truly insightful discussion with Mike Marinello. Here are my 3 takeaways. Number 1, transparency and accountability form the bedrock of trust. Leaders must be painfully transparent and consistent in both communication and action. Treating people the way you want to be treated creates a level playing field where teammates are held accountable to high, clearly articulated standards. This approach removes ambiguity and builds the necessary bedrock for a high-performing team. Number 2, protect your culture by upholding your standards. High performance is never a viable substitute for a poor cultural fit. Allowing a cultural detractor, even a high achiever, to remain on the team erodes the collective culture, and more importantly, it destroys the team's trust in you as a leader. Leaders must have the conviction to make tough calls to ensure that everyone understands the shared, non-negotiable standard. And number 3, innovation requires the courage to show up different. For an organization to win, it must actively seek ways to differentiate itself. This demands leadership that encourages its team to innovate and take calculated risks, embracing a fail fast, learn faster mindset. Whether pivoting a global company's self-identity or dumping a high-stakes pitch deck, the culture must foster courage to risk losing on merit. Mike provided some foundational principles and real-world stories that every leader can draw upon. I hope this conversation was as impactful for you, the listener, as it was for me.